Hello and welcome to the long-awaited return of our mini-series Review the 92. I'm joined by Tom for the first time in over a year, and we are talking about a new football ground in the 92 that we've been to. At times in the last year, we thought it might never happen, but finally we are back. And on the 24th of August 2021, Tom, we took a little trip to London to watch Millwall versus Cambridge United in the second round of the League EFL Cup. It was a sparsely populated ground, which is going to make this a little bit difficult for much of it, but was obviously an easy opportunity to tick Millwall off. So we're, of course, talking about the new Den, the first ground that we got to return to together after the lockdowns and whatever else has been going on for the last year and a half. Let me run you through the stats before we talk about the ground. So, firstly, it was opened on the 4th of August 1993, just under 3 months after I was born. Not that you'd be able to tell from half the grey hair. It obviously was called the New Den when it was opened. Now it's called the Den, with the other one being called the Old Den. It's got a capacity of 20,146 and a record attendance against Tom's side Arsenal in 1994 of 20,093. So, Tom, it's probably one of the newest of the old guard of stadiums before they all became sort of these modern arenas that we're talking about now. A classic four-standard stadium. Of course, we've got to judge it on the four areas that we had to look up what the names of were because we hadn't done it for so long, which will be atmosphere, location, value, and character. But before we do that, Tom, just give me your initial feelings on the ground. I know probably not so much the day itself because the atmosphere is going to be hard to judge.
It's almost an interesting question you raised there. At what point where's the cut-off point for a ground still being considered a modern ground? Getting on for 30 years, it's getting towards being quite old now, I guess, isn't it? And it still maintained those old characteristics that we, throughout this series, have always complimented highly. The classic four stands, empty corners, and it had all of those things. When we were there, it was showing its age in places. There were cobwebs, a bit of rust, could do with a lick of paint. Not things that we are terribly critical of. I think we like that kind of thing. I think we were, quite pleasantly surprised by the Den.
Talk to me about the day, obviously, because it was a pretty big one for us to go to a football match here for the first time after the various lockdowns and whatever. I know the game possibly disappointed, and we weren't probably expecting it to be a cracker. Millwall has a reputation, and we probably went to that game deliberately. But what did you make of it as an experience overall?
Most of the grounds we tick off are probably watching Luton play away. And I think for our own safety, we've bottled ever going to Millwall away with Luton, probably wisely. We always said if we're going to tick off Millwall, it's going to have to be probably sat in the home end in a game that doesn't mean a hell of a lot. And I think Cambridge in the League Cup ticked all those boxes. If at the same time it did take quite a lot away from the atmosphere and experience. It was a nice day out, wasn't it? It's straightforward to get to. You'd mapped out our route off at London Bridge, just an overground train. It took just a few minutes. Even from your seat, you could see Canary Wharf. I was really impressed with that. So yeah, it's got a lot going for it, the new Den, I'd say.
I'm in agreement with you, mate. To be honest, I don't know what I was expecting. I looked at the picture of it and thought this is going to be all right. But I was actually really pleasantly surprised by just I guess because, as we mentioned, I know we're talking about a cut-off point here. It is quite a modern stadium still by EFL standards, but it's still managed to have a bit of character. It managed to feel like an old school stadium. The four classic stands, the views out of the side. And you could imagine it's the sort of place close into the pitch that would have potentially been able to generate a big atmosphere. So I'm really pleased with it. And I will say, taking away the security things that we thought about for going to Luton away, the way they'd separated from the train station out to prevent home and away fans clashing was as good an idea as they probably could have done to prevent trouble. So I think that's potentially a positive for it as well.
Getting off the train, we saw some Cambridge fans, but they were quickly sent completely in the other direction to where us as the Millwall fans were walking. So they really do keep the two sets of fans as far apart as possible, which I don't know on a match day that has a bit more riding on it and with a few more attending it, if it does the job. But we both thought, that does make sense because Millwall's reputation goes before it. And if you can prevent crowd trouble, then yeah, it looks like they've got things in place to keep it as calm as possible on a match day.
Yeah, and I mean, it leads nicely onto the point about atmosphere, which obviously we're probably not going to be able to judge it fairly here. We do have to an extent, judge it on the game that we went to, which means it's going to get a poor score, but we're not necessarily rating it down. And I do feel, although the most vociferous Millwall fans maybe wouldn't have picked Cambridge at home on a Tuesday night to go to as an extra game, I do feel it's the sort of stadium that could have had atmosphere. And I feel that possibly the media reputation and the trepidation that a lot of people have about going to Millwall maybe perhaps is unfounded based on what we saw on the Tuesday night game we went to. So let's go on to atmosphere, Tom. It's the hardest one to judge, so I'm going to make you go first and talk about it.
Yeah, I almost feel guilty having to give it a ranking for atmosphere, because you do get these crowds at a lot of midweek games, don't you, that are barely a couple of thousand. And on the occasion we went to the Den, that's exactly what we experienced. Just a few thousand fans in what you've said is a 20,000 plus stadium. You feel a bit lost, don't you? I think we were probably in the most populated of the stands, and still wasn't any atmosphere. I don't think we heard one chant actually all game.
Not
from the home
Millwall
support
fans, no.
Cambridge, the few hundred they had, tried to make a bit of a go of it, to be fair to them, but the home support just didn't seem interested at all. And you can only judge it on what the game we've been to. I'd have to give it 2.
To be honest, I would have gone for a 3. I've not decided yet, because it's the first one we've done as like a nothing cup game where we knew there wouldn't be atmosphere. I might make this an NA. I haven't decided yet, but we've got to talk about it anyway. As you mentioned, the attendance was officially 4,005, which in a stadium of over 20,000 isn't a great deal. A good fifth or sixth for that was Cambridge fans behind the goal, which were singing. But it wasn't helped by the fact the stand opposite us, running along the far side of the pitch, was completely closed. The fact that behind the goal, the bottom tier where the away fans were closed, so they were up in the heavens, which probably didn't help the atmosphere either. So there's a lot of things going against it here. I would hasten to say there's probably not a lot of the regulars were there. It was definitely a crowd of people that don't often go and see Millwall, which we were one of, to be fair. So I would have given it a 3, but in fairness to the competition, to prevent something that's, well, it's our own fault that it's not a better atmosphere, I think we might have to give it an NA. Let's go on to location, because that, I think, is where Millwall scores big. For us, coming from Luton, it was easy. Quick train to London, which, let's be honest, you can get a quick train to London from virtually anywhere. And then when you get to London, no planning out tube maps, no planning out 2 or 3 different stops. It was 4 minutes on one train, over grounds, and you're at the station next to the stadium with what, a 5-10 minute walk at most. I don't think we can complain at all, can we?
No, like I said, you'd done your research. Got off at London Bridge, had a little walkabout, admired the Shard. Had a pint.
You admired the Shard.
You're not so keen, are you? Had a pint in the sun before it, and got on the overground. A few minutes later, there you are at the station. Just get off. You see the sign, don't you, as you're leaving South Bermondsey Station, Millwall Football Club this way. It's all guided out. Can't really go wrong. We just followed the crowd, and we were then, definitely under 10 minutes, wasn't it? I don't think anyone would have any trouble getting to the Den, to be honest.
No, I completely agree. I think it was probably one of our easiest trips. Tom, you know better than most people, I'm not a big fan of going to London, the big city life. That's not my cup of tea, but it was easy. It was laid back. It wasn't one of the big glitz and glamour parts of London, albeit it's very strange when it's only 5 minutes from London Bridge on the train that you're then in what is a completely different world, essentially. But for me, it was really easy. And I mean, I'm between 8 and 9. I feel like I don't want to go too generous on the first one back, but it was a cheap train. It was easy. I can't give it less than 9, I don't think.
No, I'm actually there. I was actually surprised by how seemingly central Millwall was. I'd like to think my geography is quite good, and I can kind of in my head picture where the football clubs in London are, but I'd have thought Millwall would have been further out than it is. It's very easy to get to. Like I said, you get good views from where we were sat. You could see Canary Wharf. Yeah, didn't take any time at all to get there, so definitely worthy of a 9, a very high score for location.
Definitely in agreement. Let's move on to value for money. Again, one that's going to be very hard for us to judge. Now, we've got to judge this game on its merits. And while you're doing that, I'll bring up all the regular prices and all of that, season tickets and all. But for us, for that game, we paid £12, which obviously is a massive cup tie price. But you can't complain. We watched a game between 2 EFL sides, League 1v Championship, for £12. I mean, you can't ask for a huge amount more. And they tried their best to get the fans in, didn't they? The kids were £6.
Yeah, and I actually was going to make that point when we spoke about atmosphere. Maybe the regulars, the ones that are looking for a bit more trouble, usually perhaps, and gave this one a miss. It did seem like the one people sat around us, but it was more families than perhaps it usually would have been, and hopefully that's people making the most. Like you said, maybe don't always get to see live football, but it was on offer. People making the most of it. Yeah, great value for money. And I'm going to contradict what I said earlier. For ground hopping, I guess the early rounds of the League Cup, when clubs are trying to get bums on seats, heavily reduce their prices, and it's easy for anyone, and it goes to general sale, doesn't sell out to members, then yeah, it is a great opportunity for people like us trying to do the 92.
I will just counteract this point though. Category B prices, I'll be fair, we'll not go for C or A. There's not a huge amount between them anyway for Millwall, for league games. Similar fate of QPR with the London prices, I'm afraid, which is between £29 and £33. The stand we're sitting in was the main stand. That one is the top price, 33 or 32. And actually the upper tier, the one we were in, most expensive in the stadium at £33. So let's mix our opinion on good value for money with their actual match day prices. Where would you put value as a club to go and watch a Millwall game in London, albeit, but for between 29 and 33 quid on average?
So when these clubs, no disrespect, like the QPRs and Millwalls in London, that aren't the most illustrious, I do wonder how they are going to go about attracting a fan base looking forward, because there's so many teams in London. And of course, our generation and the ones that are following us now, grown up with TV being televised, football being televised, you can be from anywhere and support a United, a City, whatever, Liverpool. I just think, what's their catchment area? I just really interested to see how they can charge 30 plus for a match day ticket. Okay, they're at a good level. Championship's a great league, we all know that, but that does sound very high, doesn't it? And when you're competing with so many teams in your city to get fans, if you were a kid growing up in London, you pay £30 to see Millwall, or about the same to see the West Ham, Spurs, Arsenal, Chelsea, you're going to get your head turned, probably, aren't you? So I hope these clubs aren't pricing themselves out of attracting people to come and watch them play.
That's a fair point. What score are you going to give it if I push you? You can combine it based on our value would obviously be great, but let's talk match day prices generally. We've got to wait in London, and the fact the championship prices are higher now, but
middle of the road then, maybe a 6, I think.
I was going to say 5 or 6. I'm going to be slightly harsher and say 5, but I think it's fair to say it's a very interesting point in London. It's not one to get onto today. Is it you price yourself out if you go too high, or is it if the attendance isn't going to change a huge amount anyway, do you have to get as much as you can to compete with the other clubs around? It's an interesting point, but 5 and 6, we make our first variation of the points that will probably make the episode, but it can all change with character. Now, I've had my opinions from the start of this episode on this one. It's a stadium I really liked. It's got all the features I've talked about last year that I look for in a stadium. We had even the little things like you mentioned, some of the signage coming out from like the train station, some of the older sort of metallic signs and things like that, I thought were really nice. So what are your opinions on it? I think it's a lovely ground, and you can probably guess I'm just going to score high, but are you going to match me with that?
Yeah, I'll go high for this as well. I think there's a lot to be said for these grounds. Of course, we've done this to death. We like the 4 stands. There was a huge flag with a lion saying, I think, we fear no foe. That just looked amazing because it was a night game, and there were obviously the floodlights. And as we were walking back afterwards, I do say so myself, I took quite a decent picture, I thought, of the ground with the big, huge flag. And yeah, it felt old school. Touched on it earlier about the area. It's not part side of London that you often see, even though it is close to the centre. I like the feel around the ground. You almost felt like, yeah, okay, I feel like I'm in Millwall territory. There's it's quite industrial. There are like car garages around, and you just think, okay, yeah, it's not something that immediately comes to mind when you think of the big city. It kind of had that rough and ready feel to it, and this kind of goes with my preconception of what the club was all about. So I think its character really served it well, and I'll go for an 8, I think, for the character of the ground.
Yeah, I'm actually going to match you on score. The only thing I want to add in is as well, like just little touches that they had in themselves. So they had like the little, I don't know if you remember the little old-fashioned double-decker bus bar behind the goal, which I thought was a really nice little touch. But then mixed with the modern of the way like the ticket collections and things were done at the stands were really modern and really efficient. But then once you got into the grounds, we it felt old fashioned again. It felt like you were walking up the old fashioned concrete steps, a bit like I guess when you were at say a Newcastle or one of those sort of northern bigger clubs. It felt a bit like a northern ground. I guess that's the nicest way I can put it because I've loved northern grounds generally for character, and it felt a bit more like that. I do want to very quickly mention, I know it's not character related, that they did a fabulous chicken balti pie. Um, but also, the reason I wanted to link that to character is because when we were eating that on the concourse, there were all of the sort of old photos of all of the old teams, games in Europe, the FA Cup final. They've really put a huge amount of effort into supporting the positive side of their history rather than
Yeah.
just trying to let it dwindle with the negative side, which could have been possible for a club that wanted to cover it. But I thought they put in a real effort to make the character, the history, and the heritage of the club stand out. And I have to give it an 8 as well. I was tempted to
Yeah.
give it a 9, but it was really good for me.
Yeah, that you make a good point on the concourse before kickoff. I think I had a pint and you had your pie, and we were just taking in all the pictures that were hung up on the wall, and it was quite educational. Obviously, neither of us have got any ties to Millwall. We're not experts, and we were looking like, oh yeah, do you remember that when they got Tim Cahill's team got all the way to the FA Cup final, and they got to play in Europe the following season, and they had pictures up of the ground being built and promotion seasons. And it was quite interesting to pass some time waiting for the game to start, just taking in some Millwall's history over the last couple of decades. Thought that was a nice touch.
I completely agree. I think overall we have to say a very nice ground. The negative, of course, is partly of our own doing, which is going to a League Cup tie against lower league opposition. So we should blame ourselves more for the negatives. But a really good score regardless. The totals will be on the screen now, probably excluding the first one for atmosphere because it would be unfair to judge it. If you did enjoy the episode, of course, though, please do put a thumbs up on it. Let us know what you think. If you've ever been to the Den, the new Den, what do you think of the ground? Did you have a similar experience? And how was it if you went when there was a bit more of an atmosphere? Hopefully, we'll have plenty more of these to come later this year, as it looks like attending football is a thing that is very much here to stay again now. So towards the end of the year, you might see Tom back on the channel a few more times. Thank you to Tom for joining me as always. Subscribe to stay up to date for more. And hopefully, we'll see you next time.